Vasudevaya. Okay. We're in the middle of the third chapter. And so thus far, what's happened is this. Arjuna had a meltdown, confronted with the bloody reality that he was going to have to kill his family members for a good cause. Arjuna became inconsolable after realizing he was going to have to kill his family members in a bloody armed conflict. And Krishna explained to him that you're not the body, and also that that you need to know what your duty is and then do your duty and be unattached to the results. I'm just going to start again. Arjuna had a total meltdown when he realized the carnage he was going to be a part of. Shekhar! What are you laughing at, Darshan? I see you. All right. And we're off to the races. Arjuna had a bad day. Got to figure out like a million different ways to say the same thing. And he really went through a dark night of the soul when he realized he was going to have to participate in a bloody armed conflict, and he was going to have to potentially kill his loved ones. Who could do that? Who could kill their family members? It's just mind-blowing. And Arjuna went to Krishna, took shelter of him, and Krishna gave him a couple of tidbits, a couple of really solid pieces of instruction. Number one, you're not the body, and number two, do your duty and don't be attached to the results. And these two things, they commingle real nicely. If you're not the body, you're part of something bigger. You can let go of some of the smaller stuff because you're not about that, you're about something bigger. If you're an atheist, you could also realize there are many variables you can't control for, and therefore the one thing you can control for is you can know what your integrity is, what your values are, even if they're very much this worldly, and you can attach yourself to those and then not be disturbed by the comings and goings of the world that are beyond your control anyway. So it's not that you have to be a pre-theist or a spiritualist on some level to do your duty but not be attached to the results. They go together really nicely. That higher thing you're a part of is much greater than this world, and it allows you much, much more resilience and much, much more transcendence. But you could get to this do your duty but don't be attached either within an atheistic paradigm or within a theistic or pre-theistic spiritualist paradigm. Anyway, Krishna takes the theistic route or the spiritual route, pre-theistic at this point in the Gita, because it's going to help us go further. You could imagine you could take the 405 freeway, which really only runs from San Diego up to whatever, the valley. And it's got to connect with the 5, and the 5 is going to take you all the way up to Sacramento and beyond. So sometimes you might find a shorter, wider road even, easier road for people to get onto, but it might not take you all the way where you want to go. And so Krishna starts Arjuna on real solid footing. And the thing is about the 405 analogy, it's a poor analogy because you can get on the 405 and there's no real difference whether you're on the 405 or the 5 because you join up to the 5. But you could imagine if you built a foundation that could quickly allow you to build a 1-story house, but it wouldn't be strong enough to hold up a 2-story house. Or you could take the trouble to dig deeper and build a stronger foundation, and that stronger foundation will let you build the 1st story and then the 2nd and the 3rd story. That's a better analogy because it carries with it the idea that sometimes the faster way doesn't give you as much depth. So, Krishna starts off with this idea that you're not the body, and that leads you to doing your duty without being attached to the results. That duty could eventually be then service to God because he's introduced at least a spiritual idea. Do you follow this? Whereas if you go on with the atheist idea, which is a lot easier, hey, you can't control the variables, you're just this body, but you can't do anything in this world anyway, so you could eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you shall die, or you could go a little deeper and you could try and do your duty and have some integrity, and that's a better life to live, a life that you could pass on to your grandchildren. And so do your duty, don't be attached to the results, but you could be attached to setting a proper example for other people. You could very easily get somebody, almost anybody, to go a little deeper than sensualism and hedonism. It's also called positive utilitarianism. You could easily get somebody beyond that. But then you wouldn't be able to take them to the highest calling. You follow? Oh man, I'm going to get myself in trouble today. Then Arjuna's not quite ready for that detached spiritual thing. So Krishna then starts to tell Arjuna, do your duty just to get the best result, just to be happy in this world, just because that's how the world's constructed. There's a certain, path or track, like a train track that the world's on. If you recognize that, the track, then you can go with the flow. There's a certain current in the water. If you recognize that current, you can swim with the current and you can go further than you could go on your own. If you've ever swam with the current, it's kind of ridiculous. You can just move so fast. I almost drowned in the Ganga. Like seriously, literally, actually almost drowned in the Ganga. Swam out in the Ganga at a really, really wide spot, got halfway through, was fighting the current, got knackered, started to freeze up, was having trouble treading water, didn't know what to do, and my buddy who was next to me, Vedasara, my savior, who's from Assam, he said, hey, just relax and float. And just float down the river with me. So then I just relaxed, laid on my back, took some deep breaths, and floated, and the river took us downstream, and we gradually edged our way over. And we came out a mile down the river, but I edged my way over, and I was able to recover from the lactic acid that had built up in my limbs. Had he not been there to advise me of that, I don't know what would have happened. I would have kept swimming. I would have kept fighting and trying to not to seize up and to make it through, you know? But I could flip a coin as to whether I would have made it or not. And people die in the Ganga every year. It's not like, oh my God, you're just being dramatic. Hare Krishnas die in the Ganga every single year. You go to Mayapur, and some devotee goes in the water, does not swim real well, even close to shore. I mean, they're normally people don't normally try to swim across the Ganga. It's not something that people normally do. But Especially not like me. I hadn't been in a pool in, like a decade or something like that. Maybe not that long. Maybe like 6 or 7 years I hadn't been in a pool. And I said, yeah, let's charge it. But yeah, people drown every year in the Ganga. So I definitely could have been a Hare Krishna statistic. For sure. That year, Prabhupada's great niece drowned in the Ganga, who was a friend of mine. I knew Prabhupada's great niece. We got friendly. Somehow she took a shine to me, and we spent time together, and I preached to her, and we had a friendship. And she died that year, swimming in the Ganga. How crazy is that? Okay. If you learn how to swim with the current, it's like a whole different world. You swim with a riptide. You swim out to sea and then come back in, like at a 90-degree angle with the riptide. You can get through it real quick. But if you kind of swim against it, directly against it, you'll be swimming with it all the way to shore, and you can't do it. You got to find where the riptide is, and you swim straight across it real quick. Or flow with it till it dissipates. They don't last forever. Flow with it till it dissipates, and then swim back to shore without any current rolling against you whatsoever. So if you learn that, if you learn to roll with the train tracks, if you learn to understand that train tracks are the only way you can take a train anywhere, and you have to figure out which tracks will take you where you want to go, and even if it appears you're going in the wrong direction, you're eventually going to come back in the right direction. If you learn to swim with the current, or to go, in a way which is congruent with the current, even though it may be a longer route, it's a safer route. It's a route you can navigate. Life is filled with this kind of stuff. The switchbacks on a mountain. When we go to Badrinath, do those switchbacks up the mountain, switchbacks down the mountain. You can navigate the mountain. You can't just go straight up them. Cars can't do it. You can't go straight down them. You got to spend 8 times longer going like this up the mountain. It's like such a small amount you're driving. You're driving over so few mountains, but you have to do that because you have to climb and you have to go back down. You can only climb at a certain degree. So Krishna says, hey, even if you want to enjoy, you got to figure out how to. Even if you want to enjoy, you got to figure out how to go with the current, how to roll with the principle of giving something back, of tithing, of yajna, of sacrifice. And so even if you don't want to do your duty for its own sake, then do your duty because it's going to ultimately get you what you want and make you happier. And then Krishna, the transcendentalist he is, he then breaks from what could be an atheistic discussion, and he says, hey, and this ultimately connects you to transcendence because duties are recommended in the Vedas, and then eventually you can get to a place where you go beyond doing your duty, and you're merged in transcendence, and you've solved the Rubik's Cube of this world, and you don't have to be bound by your duty anymore. But then you'll follow your duty just to set an example for other people. There may still be certain normative behaviors you have to engage in. You couldn't start eating meat or something like that. But within the realm of doing your duty, there might be more play for you. Those normative behaviors have become part of your structure. They're in your bones. And then Krishna explains how, if you've reached the state of self-realization, you should still work copacetically with your community and gradually uplift them, because everybody might not be at your level. And they might become disturbed if you try and give them too much too soon. So you should instead engage people in doing their duty, even for materialistic purposes, and gradually bring them to a higher truth in a way which won't cause their brain to tilt. And then Krishna explains something of the way a spiritualist views the world, that he really sees that everything's going on according to the modes and conditioning, genetics and epigenetics. And our free will really consists of how we choose to view the world, not necessarily in having an absolute control over the world. We don't live in an untracked universe. So it's very much about how we choose to take things, not necessarily so much what we do. And there's a complicated algorithm of karma going on, and you get just what you deserve, but where your freedom lies is in how you take it. Now that could be disempowering. I don't know. You could fight for justice because you've been given a body to fight for justice. You could take medicine, unlike the Christian Scientists, because medicine has been put on this earth by God's arrangement as well. You could find room for all sorts of activism, but there'd be a certain point at which you wouldn't buy into the idea that you're of this world and this world is the most important thing. And it wouldn't get that tantalizing and that seductive that you forgot that you have a higher home. You have a home above this world. You have a higher calling, and you won't get stuck in this world fighting for this cause and that cause, watering this leaf and that leaf as if it's the most important thing in the world, raising up your social duties as if they are your religion, as if they are your highest calling. And there'll be some detachment. And when it comes time to stop taking medicine, and when it comes time to let go gracefully, and when it comes to let go and let God, and when it comes time to see the bigger picture, you'll be able to do that. And then Krishna throws this verse in. One who's in knowledge of the absolute truth. This is text 28, chapter 3. One who's in knowledge of the absolute truth. One who's tattva vit. One who sees that which is. Tattva. Tat means that, and tva means ness. So something which has thatness, something which exists, is called tattva. Tattva means truth. Something which has thatness, which has, it has a quality of actually existing. It has a quality of thatness to it. Tattva vid, one who knows. Tattva. O mighty armed. Does not engage himself in the senses and sense gratification. One who knows guna karma vibhagayo. One who knows actions and how actions are related to conditioning. Guna, which means modes, sattva, rajas, and tamas, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Gunas really means conditioning. That we're creatures of habit, that we have a conditioning. And genetics really supports this. Genetics really supports this. There's another field called epigenetics, which is how genes express themselves, and that's not so simple because genes express themselves differently in different environments. And so although you might have a genetic predisposition towards something, that doesn't necessarily mean, statistically speaking, it means you're way more likely, but it's not necessarily a death sentence per se. Although it is in some ways, there are certain genetic predispositions which always express themselves, and you get these congenital heart defects and things you can't control for, and things which are well out of your ability. For instance, the amount of melanin in your skin. And therefore your predisposition towards skin cancer. The one who's in knowledge sees the divisions of guna and karma and how these two things are interacting with each other and how your conditioning relates to your actions and how people are acting according to a script. Guna gunesha vartanta. And the gunas are like, conditioning is like acting within itself. Like the gunas are acting in the gunas. Conditioning is acting within conditioning. And it's turning according to a preset model. So your conditioning is determining what's going on in this world. Iti matva nasajate. One who, thus knowing this, knowing that I just see that the gunas are interacting with themselves. I look at the world and I say, you know what? It's just people's conditioning playing itself out. It's just people's conditioning. It's not evil. It's not the devil. It's just their conditioning. It's their ignorance. Now, if you want to say their ignorance is not their fault, then who's the ignorance the fault of? It's the fault of God. So ultimately you have to blame them. But you could choose, for instance, you could choose to smoke as a child for decades. Then you could stop smoking for decades. Then you get emphysema. You may have done something in a past life. You may have done something early on in your life. And those things you've done may to some extent script the rest of your life. For instance, things are going to get really complicated really fast. The one who's in knowledge sees the divisions of action and conditioning. He sees how it all plays out. And he just really, when he looks at the world, he sees it's just the gunas interacting with each other. It's just people's conditioning playing out on a grand stage. Therefore, you don't blame people. You don't hate people. You see that people are doing their best with what they got. You see it's ignorance. It's not evil. Ultimately, it's their responsibility, but maybe not from this lifetime. And by the time you get dealt a deck in this world, you don't have absolute freedom anymore. By the time you get dealt a deck, by the time the deck of life deals you a hand of cards in this world, you no longer have full freedom. That's the view of a self-realized soul, and therefore you interact with the world, but you got one foot out the door. And so devotees are never that attached because they know they might have to let go at some point. They know they're for sure going to have to let go at some point. At least everything material. Spiritual things they get attached to. Material things they don't. Did you guys follow all that? We're just warming up. We're just warming up. You're not the body. Strong foundation. Do your duty. Could be done without that foundation, but with that foundation you can build multiple stories. I'm not ready for that, then do your duty to get what you want. But ultimately you're going to have to realize there's more to it. Get to a place of transcendence. You'll still do your duty. Set an example for other people to teach them, but not too much too fast. But what's your vision? Your vision is just you see the conditioning for what it is, and you don't hate people. You know, ultimately they chose it because you're not blaming God for it, but you see that it may be playing out over many lifetimes, and by the time the deck of life deals you your hand, you don't have full freedom anymore. And your genetics scripts a lot, and your freedom really consists of how you choose to see things, because Arjuna has the choice to see the gunas interacting with each other and thereby to be aloof from them and not to be in it himself. He has the ability to step out of the water and stand on the shore and watch it all going on instead of being up to his neck in it. Okay, here we go. I've been thinking a lot about George Floyd, which makes me think about the black community in this country, which makes me think about the civil rights of black people in this country, which makes me think about Jim Crow, which makes me think about slavery in this country, which makes me think about slavery all over the world. And I've got some thoughts that directly relate to the verse, bizarrely. And hopefully you'll see that I'm not just using the verse as a platform to deliver a sermon that I want to deliver, but you'll see how this verse naturally informs our current situation in this country. People are so spun out about what happened. But if you look at history, we're seeing the same drama playing itself out over and over again. I'm going to get into that in some considerable detail now. I got a bunch of different thoughts. I'm just going to start dropping them on you guys. Dave Darshan Prabhu, can you hear me? Okay. You are our representative of the BLM movement. If I say anything which you find to be untoward or offensive, please interrupt me and call me out, and I'll pivot. But with your blessing, I'm gonna move forward and speak my piece. All right? Give me a thumbs up if you're cool with that. Thank you. Thank you. Souza, I see you too. And mute yourself, would you, for a second?
Can you hear me, Prabhu?
I can hear you and I can see you. You also are. You're also on the Keep Me on the Straight and Narrow committee. Okay?
Sure.
All right. So if I say something which you find to be inappropriate or untoward or something like that, please interrupt me. I want to make sure I tread carefully, for my own safety, as well as for the safety of everybody else. And so, yeah, it's a dual purpose here. I'm going to let me see here. Dave Darshan, can you hear me? Speak to me. Yeah, I can't see you. There we go. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to see the two of you. So that way, if you guys had to correct me. So I bumped off Liv. She's also a people of color, but you guys are the representatives, and so you guys are going to correct me. But I've got some stuff to say. Here we go. Are you guys familiar with Emmett Till? Emmett Till. Yeah. Emmett Till was a black kid from Chicago. And if you really want to understand the civil rights movement in the U.S., you got to know the story of Emmett Till. He was a very important member of the civil rights movement. He was a kid from Chicago. Now, in Chicago, you went to interracial schools where black and white populations were mixed because it was an urban environment. In the South, the schools were still fully segregated. In 1955, buses, restaurants, drinking fountains, bathrooms were still segregated in a lot of the country in the South because of a series of laws called Jim Crow laws. When they made slavery illegal in 1864, they also came up with a bunch of laws which would still allow white people to segregate the black population and treat them in a very, very poor way to continue to have some kind of white supremacy. And these Jim Crow laws were actual laws, like can't ride in the same seat. If a black person wants to ride on the bus in the black section, in what was called the colored section, and a white person doesn't have a seat in the white section, then you have to give up your seat. And black people weren't allowed to eat at the same table as white people at restaurants and so on and so forth. They weren't allowed to use the same bathroom. It's going to start to become a problem pretty quick. So there were legal Jim Crow laws, like the ones I just mentioned, but then there was this whole Jim Crow culture, which wasn't actually a set of laws per se, but it was just the way the South functioned. Black people were never introduced to white people. White people were introduced to black people. Black people never call white people by their first name. They always called them Mr. If you were an 80-year-old black man, you were talking to a 7-year-old white boy, you would call him Mr. So-and-so or Master so-and-so, as children are oftentimes called Master, below the age of whatever it is, 18. Mrs. or Miss. So an 85-year-old black man talking to a 7-year-old white girl would call her Miss whatever her name was. And she would call him by his first name. Those weren't passed into law like a written law, but they were part of a culture. And that culture, in a lot of ways, was stronger than the legal system. You follow? So there were actual laws which separated black people and white people, and then there was this Jim Crow culture, which was all these unstated laws. In 1955, the South was fully immersed in Jim Crow, but Chicago, not so much. They had interracial schools. Black guys sometimes had white girlfriends. It was just like things were getting mixed up. Things were getting like, you know what I mean? Things were starting to melt together. This boy, Emmett Hill, 14 years old, went to visit his cousin. Something Wright. I can't remember his first name. I want to say Jordan Wright, but I could be wrong. He went to go visit his cousin in rural Mississippi. Now, Mississippi is the deepest place in the South that has ever existed. Mississippi is the center of the South. More than Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, more than Kentucky, more than Missouri, more than Texas. Mississippi is the core of the South. In 1956, the governor of Mississippi made up the Sovereignty Commission. It was designed to keep Mississippi free from federal oversight so that they could preserve the Mississippi way of life, which was hardcore segregation. Black people not allowed to vote. They investigated 87,000 people. They bribed black civil rights leaders, blackmailed them and bribed them. They had some of the most extensive surveillance in the country. They murdered people. It was done at the government level. They sealed those documents for 50 years because every single member of the government in Mississippi was guilty of serious crimes like murder. They were able to get some of those documents leaked in the 80s, and 25, 30 people went to prison for life. Those documents won't be released in full until 2027. While the rest of the nation was figuring stuff out, they were on a governmental level fighting the federal government. The state government of Mississippi, sovereignty means we rule ourselves. The Mississippi way of life. And they murdered people. The government hired assassins to murder people, to stop the flow of civil rights into Mississippi, to stop voter registration in Mississippi, to stop black people from going to universities. Emmett went to visit Mississippi to see his cousin. And interacted with a white woman. Carolyn something or other. I mean, it's been a while since I've studied this. He interacted with Carolyn Bryant. He interacted with a white woman in a way that was not appreciated. He might have whistled while she walked by accidentally. He might have whistled at her to make a joke with his friends. She owned a store. He bought some candy in the store. He had some interaction that was found to be offensive. She went out to her car and got a gun. All the kids split. Her husband came home. A couple nights later, he was like fishing or something like that. He came home a couple nights later, found out what was going on, beat up a bunch of people, found out where Emmett Hill was staying, this kid from Chicago, went to their house, dragged him out of bed, to put him in the back of his pickup truck, tied him up, beat him to death, shot him in the face, threw him off a bridge. His mutilated corpse was discovered 3 days later. His mother, Mammy was her first name. I can't remember her full name. Mammy Till something. I can't remember. His mother refused to let them bury her son in Mississippi. She demanded they sent his mutilated body back to Chicago. She held an open casket funeral. She said it stunk for 2 blocks when she held the open casket funeral. His body is absolutely unrecognizable. It does not look like a human. It's bloated from being in the water. If you've ever seen a corpse floating in the water, you guys haven't seen one yet, but they float in the Ganga. I've been bathing in the Ganga and a dead body's floated by and you duck down, swim to the side because it's coming at you. But they bloat and they become unrecognizable. They look kind of like logs. It's very disturbing. And that's what she held an open casket for. Over 10,000 people in Chicago attended. And in a lot of ways, it was like the birth of the civil rights movement as we know it. It was just so repugnant that a 14-year-old boy who had a smile lights up a room. If you look at the pictures of him, he was just like a very innocent, sweet child, and he was brutally murdered for nothing. And that photograph of his bludgeoned and bloated corpse made newspaper headlines all over the world. And it mobilized black people and white people like nothing before. Two men were acquitted by an all-white jury. They admitted afterwards, because they couldn't be tried again because of double jeopardy, that they killed him. Carolyn Bryant, who originally said he accosted her, grabbed her, eventually on her deathbed recounted her testimony. All the people who say he did something wrong as they got older in life recanted their testimony and said essentially he had done nothing wrong. And that because so many people got lynched in the South. So many people got killed. So many people got disappeared. The KKK was on fire. The federal government was fighting against the KKK. The KKK was on fire in the 20s and 30s. They were growing like anything. The federal government had to battle the KKK. Contain them. They were so popular. Anyway, as the civil rights movement started to kick off, then all the segregationists, they started to really tighten up. Even though they were against the killing, they had to try and preserve their Mississippi way of life. They tightened things up, and that's when they founded the Sovereignty Commission. And they battled for another 20 years to try and stave off, at least 10, maybe 20 years, to try and stave off equal rights. Maybe it was only 10 years, to 65, 66. It might have been in the 70s, I can't remember. But it was like a fire got lit in the black community. They just could not tolerate it. It was too much. It was too heinous. A single death. Because he hadn't observed the Jim Crow etiquette, not even the laws, but just the etiquette. He went into a foreign situation and he didn't understand the etiquette. And he behaved wrong because he wasn't trained in the way to do business in rural Mississippi. And so he behaved like a Chicagoan in rural Mississippi, and he got killed at the age of 14 by grown men who beat him to within an inch of his life. His eye was out of his socket. Really bad stuff. People reported hearing him cry in the barn while he was being beaten to death. They eventually shot him in the head, dumped his body, and got off scot-free. Cold-blooded murder. First-degree murder. Not a crime of passion. First-degree murder. Are we good? So, when Muhammad Ali heard about the murderers getting free, saw the photographs of it, he got so upset he went and vandalized a train station and managed to get a train to get derailed. And Rosa Parks attended Mammy, Emmett Till's mother, eventually went on a tour, a fundraising tour for the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a very, very big black civil rights movement. You can tell by the name how far it goes. It goes back to the 20s because he used the word colored for black people. So it just shows that was like the standard term to use. You're going way back in American language. She went on a super successful fundraising tour. Martin Luther King came. He spoke in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa Parks heard him speak. And she was sitting on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, 6 months later. And she was sitting in the black part, the colored section of the bus. And a white guy couldn't get a seat in the white section, so they demanded that she move to make room for this white guy, and she refused. That eventually went to the Supreme Court. That got ruled segregation on buses illegal, and that eventually turned into the civil rights movement. She's considered to be the mother of the civil rights movement. She said that she did that because she felt like she owed it to Emmett Till. She saw what had happened to him, and she felt like she couldn't sit by idly and do nothing. And so she, a single woman, made that act. And in a lot of ways, a lot of people say she's the mother of modern day civil rights because it all came crumbling down from that because she did the crime. She did the crime that was against the actual Jim Crow laws, like actual law. Got taken to court. She couldn't get defeated. Went up to the Supreme Court. It got appealed because they had the lawyers who would do that because you're trying to get a case to the Supreme Court. And that started the dominoes tumbling. And that was the murder of Emmett Till. There's hundreds of memorials to him in the U.S. His story it's part of what you learn growing up. Even I learned it growing up. It's kind of like, if you're a high school kid in the U.S. and you study any kind of U.S. history, you'll learn about Emmett Till. I think George Floyd is like Emmett Till. It's a little messier. George Floyd was probably on drugs. He was 46 years old. He had, a rap sheet a mile long. He resisted arrest a little bit. It obviously was not first-degree premeditated murder. There are a number of ways in which George Floyd was not Emmett Till, nowhere near Emmett Till. The heinousness of the crime, the premeditation of the crime, the brutality of it, the murdering of a child, the beating him to death, definitely Derek Chauvin and his accomplices will not get off. They will go to jail for a long time. The fact that he got off, that he did nothing wrong, there was no even crime committed. In a lot of ways, it's dissimilar from Emmett Till. But for me, when I look at George Floyd, there's this image of George Floyd being murdered, and there's this picture of Emmett Till's body, and these things are rallying points, where it's just like, enough is enough. Enough is enough. And I've been through race riots before, but this one feels different to me. And I really think that some of the Jim Crow culture that still exists in the U.S. in the form of racial discrimination is going to finally have to die an ignoble death, a long overdue ignoble death. I feel like things are changing. People are waking up to the egregiousness of the way we treat our black brethren in this country. And so when I look at Emmett Till and I look at George Floyd, I see a similar thing happening. You look at it historically speaking, you see the same kind of protests, the same kind of outrage. And although the two things are dissimilar, we're also in 2020, we're not in 1955. And so given that 65 years have passed, this crime for today's time is just insane. That said, injustice isn't going anywhere. We should use this to move forward, and it's going to happen. And it's a good thing it's happening. It's long overdue. But injustice isn't at risk of dying out or going extinct anytime soon. You drive an hour from here. You're in Baja California, Mexico, one of the most violent states in all of Mexico, one of the most violent states in all of Latin America. In Mexico, 130 politicians were killed last year in elections. 130 politicians were killed last year in elections. Do you know how many unarmed people were killed by police officers in the U.S.? Last year, 2019? 28. 28 unarmed people. And unarmed there means they might have had a gun in their car, it just wasn't on them at the moment. They might have been committing a crime, they just weren't armed at the moment. Way more police officers were killed. Way more police officers were killed. You go to Mexico, just a stone's throw from here, 130 politicians were murdered. Most of those the police were complicit. They had to federalize the police force in Mexico last year, the Prime Minister of Mexico. He finally had to give up on working with the local police force, and he had to make a National Guard because he can't trust the police to do anything because they're all corrupt. So now the military is his police force, and they've had to infiltrate and do regular old policing in all the states because you can't trust the local police force because it's so systemically corrupt. Meanwhile, Mauritania, on the west coast of Africa, they just declared slavery illegal in 2007. You heard that right. In 2007, it was still legal to own slaves. And it was the Berbers who owned the Haratin. It was like white Middle Eastern slave owners who owned black African slaves. For 1,000+ years. Full slavery. Not indentured servitude, actual slavery. Legal in Mauritania. And there's still at least 100,000 slaves. In 2012, there was 500,000 slaves. They're like, it's not going anywhere. No one's getting prosecuted for it. 20% of the world's children under the age of 5 are stunted. That means they will never grow up to be at their regular height or weight because of malnutrition that they suffered early on in life. 20% of the world's children. 3.1 million children die of starvation every year. That means, If you look at unarmed black people who die in this country every year, it was 9 last year. 9 children die in 90 seconds. Every 90 seconds, 9 children die of starvation. Every 90 seconds, 9 children die of starvation in the world, which equals the totality of unarmed black people who were killed last year in this country. We live in the first world. We have first world problems. We should deal with them. They're real problems. But for everybody else in the world, at least for the vast majority of the world's population, living in the U.S., black or white, means you won the lottery. People are dying to get here. Now, within the black and white communities in the U.S., white people, like myself, live a life of privilege. I don't have to worry about police shooting me when they pull me over in the car. I don't have to worry about so many things that black people have to worry about. And so if you compare the two, there's incredible disparity. But you compare the entire U.S. to the rest of the world, we got first world problems. It doesn't mean we should not address them. It doesn't mean it's not heinous. It doesn't mean we should let this go in this country. It doesn't mean we shouldn't set the gold standard for the world, or at least catch up with Europe. We can't set a standard, gold standard. At least we can catch up with Europe. But make no mistake about it, suffering is going on all over the world on a scale we don't even fathom in this country. You kind of got to travel to see it. You got to go. You got to go to Soweto in South Africa. You got to go to villages in India. You got to see places suffering from droughts. Not droughts like we have here, where they tell you not to garden your, not like droughts like that. Like droughts where there's no water. You got to walk 6 miles to get water, and the water you're drinking is all contaminated. And you got to drink it anyway, and you get diseases from drinking contaminated water, but you got no choice because you're going to die if you don't drink it. I got sick drinking contaminated water. I was out in the middle of nowhere in India, and I was dehydrated. I wasn't going to make it, and I knew the place I was drinking water from was suspect, and it wasn't going to be good for me. And I got what's it called? Hepatitis A from drinking bad water. It's not the intravenous one; it's the light one you get. But I knew it. I knew I was drinking bad water. I just had no choice. I got death, seriously ill. But I was done. I was too hot. I was going to die. There's no water around. Nobody around. I'm in the middle of nowhere. A verse like this allows you to be active in this world and do your part, fight your battles like Arjuna had to fight his. Stand up for what's right and do the right thing, see the big picture, and not get overwhelmed by it. Not get paralyzed by looking at the totality of suffering, not get myopically focused just on the suffering that's going on in one place, and making that your religion, to be able to see the big picture and be a little bit aloof from it all, and at the same time still participate without getting swallowed up by it where you can't think of anything else. This verse in the Gita is as relevant today as it's ever been. They've studied. They can't find that cops in the U.S. are racially unfair to black people. The biggest studies have not proven it. There's 1,000 police deaths, 235 of them were black people. It's 23.5%. Black people only make up 13% of the population. That means it's 1.75 times what it should be based on the population. But then that same community, the black community, is responsible for 53% of murders and 60% of robberies. And so in that sense, they're getting killed way less than they should be based on crime statistics themselves. Now you could say it's bad policies that are causing black people to commit more crimes, and it's because of poverty and stuff like that. That's fine. You can address that. But that doesn't mean the police officers are... In fact, white police officers have been shown to shoot black people less often than black police officers. I don't even think we should get rid of chokeholds. Even Trump thinks we should get rid of chokeholds. I don't believe that. I believe cops should be really, really well skilled in hand-to-hand combat, so they don't have to deploy their weapons and threaten people with death, so they can control people and know how to grab somebody's neck without killing them. I mean, the guy just had no sense of what he was doing, and everything has to elevate to a potentially lethal conflict because they have no idea how to deal with people. You know, those skinny cops running around. They should be big, strong people who are trained how to fight. That's what they should do. They should be professional fighters, practically speaking, so that they're masters of both lethal as well as non-lethal ways of controlling crowds. And manipulating somebody's neck is super critical. You look at wrestling, it's all about manipulating somebody's head. Where the head goes, the body will follow. To take that tool away from them, because you're 18 and a half times more likely as a white police officer to get killed by a black criminal than you are a black criminal who's unarmed to get shot by a white cop. 18 and a half times more likely. And so I don't think we should, I think we should defund the police and let firefighters and social workers do so much of the non-lethal potentially, or non-violent, or where you don't require arms. If you want to take the arms away from the police officers, that's great too, like they do in England. But we got to figure this stuff out. We got to take. You cannot have the Second Amendment in effect and have unarmed police officers in this country. They'll get slaughtered, and it's already a slaughterhouse for police officers. Hundreds of police officers were killed last year in the line of duty. Whereas only 28 unarmed people were killed, 19 of whom were white. So when you look at the statistics, you don't find this incredible police brutality all over the place. It's just not there. Maybe brutality, not murder. What happened in Minneapolis with murdering George Floyd on camera, it's just like something out of a horror movie. And those cops are going to go away for decades, if not for 50, 60 years, at least a couple of decades, if not more. Justice will be served. There's no way the courts aren't going to do their job. They got arrested in record time. They get indicted in record time. Everybody got indicted. They escalated to second-degree murder. I mean, it's heavy. Major police reform going on in Minneapolis. I think it's all great. I think it should be done. But I also don't think that the solution is to completely gut the police department, who help us and protect us. Nor do I think we can make them unarmed when we have a Second Amendment law running rampant in this country. Nor do I think we should take away non-lethal tools like manipulating the neck to control the body of a bigger person. They just have to be trained what to do. None of them have any training. All police officers should take Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. All police officers should take wrestling. All police officers should lift weights. All police officers should be trained in non-violent, non-lethal combat. They should all be big. They should have to work out. They should have to be big, large, strong people who are physically intimidated. They had to take weights away from prisons because the convicts were getting all big, and then they come out and commit crimes. Get the cops big, like the convicts. Make that part of their job, that they get really strong. Make that part of what it means to be a police officer. Anyway, I have so many thoughts on this subject, but I look at a verse like this from the Gita, and it gives me some kind of a sense of detachment from the whole thing, so I can see the bigger picture and realize there's always going to be injustice, and I can be active in doing my part and playing my role, but I'm never going to be able to fix it, and I can't drown in it because there's something bigger going on. I'm not going to forget God. I'm going to do my part in this world while I'm here, but I'm not going to drown in this stuff, because if you think about it too much, you get so wrapped up and it's like nothing else matters, and this becomes your religion. And you get obsessed with it. And you think everybody else should join your religion and join your cult. And we got to work for these equal rights, and we got a momentous occasion, and this is like the modern day Emmett Till moment, and we should use it, and big changes are coming. It's going to be great. And then we got to look at the rest of the world too and realize that we've got first world problems in this country. And the rest of the world can't even eat. They're not even at the level on Maslow's hierarchy of needs where they can worry about safety and social things and dignity. They're just trying to eat and drink water. And our hearts should go out to them as well. All right. I'm done. How much time we got? 40 seconds. Okay. For those of you who are watching on Instagram, Thank you very, very much for participating. We're all out of time. I hope I didn't say anything which was insensitive. But I think about this stuff, and I'm looking for a version of reality which might not be pretty, but which actually holds up to scrutiny, and which can actually make the way go forward. So thank you very much. You guys can stay on Zoom if you wanted for a minute and give some feedback if you guys have any questions, comments, discussion.